I would like to hear about uh, her platform as far as being a intimacy life coach. A little bit about that. I want people to hear it again once we get started, but
Yeah.
maybe I can ask
And we're
questions on
live.
that. We're live.
We're live. Yes, we are.
Good evening, friends. I want to introduce you to the new podcast. It's called Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. When people have wounds, it's tough to give God your all because you can't, because of those wounds that are hurting and bleeding, and they have a major effect on doing God's will. This program promotes three basic things. Number one, forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. We accomplish this maxim by creating a safe platform of discussion without names or places to maintain that safe platform. Our topics will include sexual abuse, religious abuse, disenfranchisement, church division, and addictions of most types. We offer live counseling sessions, a counseling continuum, and meaningful question and answer. Our team includes Lita Williams, author, contributor to Arise magazine, Linda Holmes, LPN, years of experience, Ms. Tennille, our technical director, founder, Arise magazine, and her newsletter. And my name is Moon, licensed counselor and founder of Antioch Youth Center counseling program here in Macon, Georgia. The views and opinions expressed on the podcast, those of our guests, may not necessarily reflect or present our ideas here at Wounded Heart, Wounded Churches. Be advised, tonight's content is sensitive. Some may find it offensive or disturbing, and so we do want to warn you about parental discretion is strongly advised. Tonight we have two very special guests. First, we have Miss Deb. She's an intimacy life coach, been active for years in S&A. She has a grasp of the 12 steps and how they relate to sexual addiction with a biblical application. She's involved in presenting her program, group leadership in S&A, and supports new chapters around the country. Our second guest is you, our listeners. You can chime in on that live chat, YouTube, Church of God, Macon, Georgia. Put in the word wounded, and it'll come up, and you can get those questions or comments activated. You can also contact our office during the week at 478-784-7600. Email reach1aol.com. Deb, to begin us today, some shocking statistics from Focus on the Family. Almost 40% ministers, male and female, have inappropriate connections with their parishioners. In the Bible, we have the first man after God's own heart, strongest man, David's son, all had problems with S&D, especially David and, of course, Samson and David's son. As licensed counselor, the majority of my clients, 75% or more, had problems with S&A. So, Deb, questions for you today, and we are in need for you to walk us through these things. What is meant by the word anonymity in S&A?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right.
Yes, it is.
Thanks. So my name is Deb from West Virginia. I have been a member of Sex Addicts Anonymous for almost 9 years. I am a volunteer meeting contact for several of the telephone and video meetings. And in my personal work life, I am an intimacy life coach, which is a mental health care extra thing. I'm not licensed. So a therapist might prescribe or might diagnose something, and a psychiatrist might prescribe something. A life coach tends to encourage people to focus on what they would like to accomplish in their life and how they can meet those goals. And an intimacy life coach focuses on the topics of connection with self, others, and the source of spiritual strength. So anonymity, the reason why Sex Addicts Anonymous is called anonymous is because the names of SAA members and all the details of what we share in the meetings are kept confidential and not repeated outside of the meetings, which is why I'm not showing my face. It also means that inside the meetings, we put aside our outside identities, whatever those may be, and we only act as members of the fellowship. Just as God isn't a respecter of persons, or he doesn't show favoritism in SAA, we try not to do that either. So everybody's the same. So that's what that means.
My next question, should all child abuse be reported to the authorities?
Good question. That's a real good question.
And let me ask this too, to our listeners, what is your opinion on that? We want to get your input. You're part of the solution here.
Absolutely.
Do you think that all child abuse should be reported to the authorities? What do you think, Deb?
That is a difficult question.
Yes.
I mean, the first answer is sexual child abuse is illegal, and it can cause lifelong issues for the survivors. I myself am a survivor of childhood sexual inappropriate contact, and it has definitely had a negative impact on my life. But if it weren't for that, I would not have found recovery, and I wouldn't be developing intimacy with self, others, and the God of my understanding. So I'm grateful for my path, but it is very important that we protect our children. And,
True.
you know, I feel like if I have a suspicion that a child is being abused based on either physical evidence or behavioral signs, either in the child, or if I notice something with the parent or caregiver, or if the child has actually disclosed something to me that's inappropriate or raises a red flag for me, it is my responsibility to report that to the authorities.
I had some statistics from the government, also from another program called Brenner Center, reported that 80% of all sexual assaults go unreported. That's shocking. And NIPVIS reported 1.3 million cases in 2010. So if 80% are not reported, and they still found 1 million cases in doing that year, many of them are not being reported or even discussed or talked about. State laws are pretty tough too. Indiana, aggravated rape, 20 to 40 years. Iowa, sexual abuse, first degree, life without parole, mandatory sentence.
Wow. Wow.
In Kentucky, aggravated rape, 20 to 50. So listeners, what do you think? Is that too much time to give for the abuser, or what's your thoughts on that? So Deb, if sexual abuse, when we talk about that, like any other abuse, there are certain signs. I mentioned last week, I worked with the suicide prevention and for about 2 years, and there were certain signs that people leave. Maybe they don't know, maybe they do know, but they left certain signs to let you know what's going on. Are there certain signs that can be seen of possible sexual abuse?
Yes, and I don't really want to take the time to get into all of those, but here are some great resources. There are, and this is just a few. I mean, this is, and SAA has nothing to do with these, just so that we're clear. I'm not really representing SAA. I've had a lot of experience with it, so I'm happy to share my experience with a lot of different things. But some of these organizations on their websites have great information of how to recognize when something is off and then what to do about it, potential next steps, and also some great suggestions of ways to protect our children. One I want to draw the attention to is this last one, early, open, and often. You know, it's not the talk anymore these days that's helpful. My parents had, well, one of my parents had one conversation with me about sexuality, and that was it. We never talked about it ever again that I can remember, you know, and I think I'm not alone in that. So I never had a safe place to talk about things that were happening to me until, you know, I disclosed something, and then it got kind of blown up, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But, you know, with my own children, I am grateful that I have been in recovery because I'm more comfortable talking about things at age appropriate, and using opportunities when they ask questions, like if a pet has a baby, or if there's something that's said in school, we have an opportunity to just talk about our values and our experiences and what is important to us. For me, I was raised in a kind of a sex negative environment. It wasn't talked about, and I got the impression that it was dirty, wrong, and bad. So when I'm talking with my children, I try to be very positive that sex is a loving thing that I express with my committed partner, my husband, their father, and that they can look forward to that when they're older. And, their bodies are a gift from God, and they're not something to be ashamed of, but they are private, and nobody should be trying to touch them in private places, or if they are being asked to do something they don't feel comfortable with, in no way should they go ahead with that. They need to have safe people that they can talk with about what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, so that things aren't kept in quiet and hush hush.
Well, let me ask something, Deb, here, if you don't mind. I know you said you didn't want to go much into it, and I pretty much got that, but this is specifically for the child. How can we tell as a parent or as an adult concerned about a certain child that there has been some kind of foreplay, something wrong, has been introduced? How do we deal with that? Especially if a child is very promiscuous at such a young age. How do you handle those type of situations? How do you work with that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. That is one of the signs of being introduced to sexual behavior that's not appropriate. I mean, all children explore, which is normal and natural. But if children are being sexual with each other, or if seems to be more than just exploration, that might be a red flag. And, if it's a child that I have a good relationship with, I might ask just some kind of casual questions and see if they will share a little bit. If I do suspect from what I hear or what I observe from interactions with them and another person that there is something that needs to be addressed, as was mentioned, it kind of varies from location, but it's my responsibility to get the authorities involved if I feel like that child is in danger.
Okay.
If sexual abuse is not handled properly, could it perpetuate or exacerbate the problem in the future?
Yes. And this could be on either side of that fence too, either the child or the perpetrator. If either one of them doesn't receive the support that they need, it could greatly impact their lives in a negative way. For me, I was forced to repeat what happened to me over and over and over again with a lawyer to make sure that I had my story straight. And now I know that just re-traumatized me. I don't know how many times. And it's very important for the child who is experiencing something like this to be heard and witnessed, and for them to be able to share their truth, but in a safe place,
Right.
Instead of a way that re-traumatizes them. And if it's not addressed, also, it can have really negative consequences. As we can see, that child may grow up with compulsive sexual behaviors and become a sex addict, may perpetrate themselves later on, so it's very important. But also it's important for the perpetrator, because people don't just pop out of the womb a sexual predator,
Right.
we don't come to the planet like that,
True.
So something has happened more than likely in that person's life that has caused them to have, very likely they have been struggling with addictive sexual behaviors for quite a while, and it's gone further down the scale. I can't say that's true for everybody, but that could very well be the case. And while it is important that the perpetrator be kept in a safe place where they can't continue hurting, it's also important for them to be safe, because in the penal system, some places, if it's known that a person has harmed children, their life could be in danger. Yeah.
Right.
So, you know,
True. That is very true.
so I don't know what properly handled means, but it is a sensitive issue, and its caution is very important, and it's case by case. Unfortunately, I love that I have a relationship with the God of my understanding to help me discern in certain situations, you know, what's the best thing for, primarily for the child involved. You know, it depends on the age, it depends on the circumstances. You know, is it going to cause more harm if they're yanked out of their situation where they have some sort of stability and you know, familiarity, or is it better for them if they're removed? I don't know. You know, I don't know the answers to all those questions.
Right.
But I believe that God does, and that's why, you know, prayer and discernment is really important in all of this.
Deb, you mentioned something about a legal system. I don't want to put you on the spot and make you feel uncomfortable, but did you go through the legal system when you were a child?
I did. I testified against the person that perpetrated against me. What wound up happening was I was 6, and they asked if I ever told lies. Well, what 6-year-old doesn't tell lies sometimes, you know? And eventually they, quote, proved that I was not to be trusted, and the person did not receive any punishment for what happened. And so that left me with this really strong desire to always tell the truth and to be heard and understood. And I learned in recovery that that's not unusual. A lot of people that have experienced abuse have this really big need to be heard and understood. The problem is it's become a greater problem in my life, because anytime somebody has a different opinion than I do, that pushes that button of I'm not being believed or understood, and it can cause emotional flashbacks, and then I act like a child instead of an adult, and you know, that's where mental health care comes in. You know, that's always helpful to deal with those, you know.
Were you questioned from the lawyer in a side room, or was it doing the court system, or how was that questioning? How they do that process when they questioned you?
From what I've heard, because I don't remember any of it, from what I've been told, it was ahead of time. You know, I rehearsed my story ahead of time over and over and over. And then when the court actually took place, my parents were removed from the room, and they were allowed to interrogate me without support. So, I mean, there's a series of things that happened with me that caused, I mean, I look at that now and go, well, no wonder I have issues, you know? I mean, and I know of many people that have had it tons worse, but I'm just saying, you know, there's impact. A trauma defined is any experience that we as a person are overwhelmed by. So it can be little trauma, or it can be big trauma. It can be a circumstance that happens over a period of time, or it can be an event, you know. But I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen to people that can cause an effect in their life. And, you know, it's important to be able to be sensitive to each person's trauma that I come in contact with, because I don't know what they've been through. And if they're acting in a way that doesn't make sense to me, it might be that they're reacting to something in the present, while some emotions and stuff from the past are being brought up, and they may not even be aware of it. For me, a lot of my memories are separated from my emotional reactions. So they're flashbacks, but they're emotional flashbacks and not like remembering things that happened. So it wasn't even until in recovery that I started to become aware that that was happening, so that I could catch it and deal with it and start responding as an adult instead of reacting like a child. Now, what I'm talking about has nothing to do with the screen that I'm sharing. So I hope there's some people that are kind of confused.
We get it.
I just wanted to mention, you know, in many of the SAA telemeetings that I attend, and this might be the case for other S-related fellowships as well, they usually have some kind of statement like this that says, just be aware when you're sharing, don't disclose something that somebody might need to report, because we don't want to have to break the anonymity of the group, but we are responsible to report things. That doesn't mean that it's okay to do those things or get away with them. One other thing I wanted to mention was the 9th step is the amends step. It is where we repair damage that we have done. and we commit ourselves to setting things right. Now, in the case of perpetrating sexual abuse, that's really hard. You can't undo that, but there are ways that people have done, and again, it's a case by case, but there are ways that people have been able to make an amend for what they've done. It may be directly to the individual, if that's safe and appropriate, or it may be indirect by donating money to an organization that fights child abuse, for example, or other things like that. So, it's case by case, and we need to have support. We need to, a lot of us, consult with our sponsor or our guide that's helping us work through the steps, perhaps an outside professional if it's necessary. Some people have said, I've heard this said, that owning their stuff and doing time has been the best thing for them.
Right.
So it's not
Really?
necessarily a bad thing
Right.
if
Wow.
they do, experience the consequences of their decisions.
Right.
So it's different for everybody, unfortunately.
I've heard that over and over again. Last session, there was a topic under under the information you gave, and it talked about love addiction. So can you expand on that a little bit? Love addiction, what is the mores, traditions of it? Where that term came from?
So I do have a slide here somewhere, but I don't want to mess it up and try to find it. So I'll hopefully show it in a minute. But sex addiction shows up in a lot of different ways. It can show up as compulsive sexual avoidance or intimacy avoidance, which is really behind sex addiction. If I'm acting out sexually, if I'm compulsively using my sexuality like a drug or like a weapon to have some sense of power or control over my emotions or over another person, then I am not bonding and connecting with myself or with my partner or bringing God into that. I'm using sex like a drug, and I'm furthering the addictive cycle. And love addiction can be the same thing. If I was a person that needed to be in relationships, or I needed that intrigue, that oh, I like you and I'm going to flirt with you kind of a thing, if I got high off of that, I mean, that feels good, and everybody enjoys that when we're getting to know somebody and there's attraction there. But there are some people that carry that to an extreme, and it becomes compulsive, or they do that with more than one person, or they can't be on their own. They don't feel like they have an identity on their own. They have to be relying on those interactions in order to feel good, and it becomes something that takes over their life. Instead of being a normal part of life, it becomes their entire life. It just takes over, and they're like obsessed with somebody, and they might be stalking them, and it can go really into the extremes. So I mean, SAA has a place for, and probably other 12-step fellowships too, have a place for all kinds of aspects of people that are wounded sexually, in one way or another.
Have you found that, far as the love addiction, are there more male or female who are in that category of the love addiction? Do you find more male or female of that?
That's a good question. There is a fellowship called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, which kind of focuses more on the love addiction part of that, and it's more relational, and it does tend to have more women in that fellowship. Sex Addicts Anonymous tends to have more men that are trying to stop acting out, but it's SAA that I've been a part of for almost 9 years, so I know a little bit more about that fellowship, and it's quite diverse, and it's increasing in diversity. So it surprised me how many men are sexually avoidant or have an element of love addiction that they're struggling with. I thought it would be just a woman's thing, but it really doesn't show any gender. I mean, these days there's different gender identities and stuff anyway, and it's just these issues can show up in a lot of different people. I mean, somebody mentioned this week when I was talking with them, you can't usually tell from the outside if a person's a sex addict. I mean,
right.
I had this
True.
vision of somebody at a church, but not necessarily. I mean, people can appear from the outside to have it all together, and it's mostly internal. We don't wear it on our sleeve. We don't have the scarlet letter, to show
It's true.
Dealing with.
Very true.
I have a 3-part question. how could religious institutions handle sexual addiction more effectively? How could institutions, religious in nature, handle these issues in a more effective way?
Okay, thank you. So here are some thoughts, and a question that kind of went along with that from last week was, does the religious community in some cases handle perpetrators or victims with a hush hush attitude? And these are just my thoughts, just as a disclaimer from my own experience. But okay, publicly shaming someone does not create emotional safety in a faith community. If I were sitting in a meeting and I heard somebody publicly shaming somebody else for whatever reason, that would not feel safe to me, and that's not going to be a deterrent. Sex addiction is not deterred by negative consequences because it's an addiction.
It's an addiction, yeah.
Right. It does not matter. The consequences keep getting worse and worse, and people keep doing their behavior until it's addressed spiritually. It's a spiritual issue, so it needs to be addressed by applying the spiritual principles. Lack of education about sex addiction might result in ineffective guidance. For example, somebody who is counseling a person may not recognize that what they're describing is an addiction, and they may say, well, you need to pray more, you need to read more scripture, go to church, do service, which are all very good things, but they may not cure it if it's an addiction. They may need something else in addition to those things, and they may just feel very shameful because they can't stop and they can't handle it, and they're doing everything that they can and they still can't do it. So that could actually exacerbate the problem. Not understanding this is what I mentioned before, that not understanding the importance of the victim's need to be heard could contribute to deepening the trauma. So in religious institutions or faith communities, it's really important that the victims be given a chance to be heard in safe environments so they can move away from being the victim. They may still be a survivor for the rest of their life, but if I'm a victim, I have no choices. But if I am not a victim, if this is what happened to me, these are the facts, but I'm moving on, then I do have responsibility and I do have choices, and that's a lot healthier for me. And as I mentioned before too, both the perpetrator and the victim need loving support and safety. Right. So it's the hush hush thing is very detrimental.
And we try to.
I'm
please
sorry.
go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I'm going back to the perpetrator. A lot of emphasis can be used on the victim, but the perpetrator, as you said, needs that loving support also. I mean, obviously, as it was told before, that behavior, wasn't necessarily natural. That was something they either learned or experienced, and the perpetrator needs to be, looked out in love as well, I would think, under those circumstances.
Absolutely, yes.
Our time is just about gone again, but they have one more question that's going to another program, I think, I'm not sure, but what are the effects of pornography?
That's a big one.
That's open-ended. And our time is gone.
This will go on for a long time.
You may have to come back.
So
pornography. And listeners, we want you to come in on this because the issue is there. You and I both know that. The issue is there. And we got to have a platform that is safe. We can discuss things and then get help from God, because God will help us if we're honest to tell about it and talk about it and get it done. So pornography, what effects, or are there any? I mean, are there any effects of it? Is it natural?
Well, that is a good question. There are many today that would say it is. It's very normal. I mean, because it's everywhere and it's easy to find. Right. Is it natural? Heck no, not in my opinion. Nor do I think it's helpful in a person's life. These are the reasons why. Porn promotes objectification, making myself or other people an object. I don't see people as human beings with feelings and needs. And I expect my physical relationships, my physical sexual relationships, to mimic what I've seen in those depicted in porn. And it's not like that. mechanically enhanced sexual experiences are far more intense than actual sex. And so people can feel very disappointed. Plus, people are human. Somebody might burp or have bad breath or something. Everything like that gets edited out of the movies. You know what I'm saying? So it's very easy to have expectations that are unreal and to not take into account another person's feelings and needs. Porn often also encourages sex trafficking. What a person might see in porn is not what's really happening. A lot of times they're on drugs. A lot of times they're being coerced to do things.
Wow.
They're not enjoying it and looking, it's not, I know people that have been in the business, and I know for a fact it is not pleasant. So that could be a whole nother.
Wow.
Anyway, porn
So sad.
also, it creates this high, it creates this, this, and that's a good website right here, the Shatterproof. I forgot to close the the rest of the parentheses should be right there, folks. But that's a little video that explains what happens in the brain. It's for drugs or alcohol, but the same process happens with sex addiction because we're using it as a drug, and it just promotes disconnection. So there's nothing, I don't think there's a darn thing that's good about porn, but
wow.
It can cause a lot of problems if it becomes an addiction too. I mean, there are people that are saying they started looking at porn at age 11, so we got to protect our kids.
Yes, absolutely.
They could easily fall prey to this stuff, but it is a disease. We're not bad people. If anybody listening is struggling with porn and it is affecting their life negatively, if they feel like it's getting progressive and it's becoming a compulsion, if they're obsessed with sexual behavior, whether it's porn or something else, there is help available. You're not a bad person. It's just the what happens in the brain. But it is dangerous, and it's something with major consequences. I cannot stress that enough. All addictions lead to death eventually if they're not checked. They don't just go away on their own. If it is an addiction, it is very, very important to get some help and support. And for me, the 12 steps have been very helpful because they are the spiritual principles, which I find in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And even people that aren't Christians have still been able to apply those principles in their life with great success in stopping addictive sexual behaviors. One website that would be helpful is saa-recovery.org. There's a little self-test that you can take if you want to know if you might be a sex addict. And there are meetings. Here's just some brief information. I'll just speed through this. No, we're out of time. So sex addict a program like Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was founded in 1977 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. It is a nonprofit, non-professional, volunteer-run fellowship, and currently there's over 2,000 SAA meetings in over 34 countries in several different languages. So it's really exciting to me. And there's a website that's really good for electronic meetings, SAAtalk.info. There's pretty much a meeting almost anytime, any day. And that's a great website. And there's no requirements for SAA for membership except the desire to stop addictive sexual behavior, whatever that is for a person, because there are many different things that could be addictive sexual behavior. So we all define that for ourselves. People of all genders and beliefs are welcome. There's no dues or fees. We support ourselves through our voluntary contributions. We don't accept contributions from anyone outside of the fellowship. And here's some information if you would like to get in touch with SAA. And I think I made it.
Very good. Well,
wow, poor thing. But you did.
Good job.
You did. Great job.
Well, our time is up. Deb, again, thanks so much. We appreciate that so very much. It's been very informative. Again, this is the podcast called Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We're here every Thursday to reach out to those who have been wounded in different avenues of church activity or in the world, however, to produce and really encourage forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. Very important. So Deb, again, thanks so much. To our viewers, Deb. Thanks for being here. Sister Neil, Sister Annette, Sister Linda, good to see you again next week, next Thursday. May God bless you.